Welcome to Beyond the Call podcast, where we tell the stories of those people behind the jobs we rely on. We go into the good, the bad and the ugly, and we shine a light in what can be a dark place. Just a warning, the content can be graphic and distressing, so please use your discretion. Please like and subscribe on your podcast platform and our social media. And if you have feedback, I read every single one. Let's get on to this episode of Beyond the Call. Okay, folks, welcome to another episode of Beyond the Call. We are on part 3 of our conversation with my guest, Nich Woolf. Please go back and listen to 1 and 2 if you haven't. This guy's done more in his lifetime than most of us are doing 6. There's some really cool stories. When we finished up our last one, he gave us an awesome story about a young fella. Go back and listen to it. It's worth listening to. Welcome back, Nich. So we're in the mid-20s and you've done Afghanistan. You've come back. It's changed your soul. And meantime, you've still got a job and a life that you have to keep going with over here.
Yes, I did some great stuff in Avon. We were really busy. We had some really hard shifts, proper city stuff and some rural stuff thrown together. But I desperately wanted to get away from Avon because of the difficulties I had over politics and so on. I'd had some interesting jobs. One that I will share from Avon days was I went to an ambulance station for a night shift, and I was there a little bit early. My crewmate was also there. So we checked over the vehicle and were ready to roll. Probably 10 seconds past our shift start, we had a call which was 200 meters away from the station, outside a pub, a man on fire. We were sat in the vehicle. We literally just started it, drove 200 meters and pulled up. And this guy, it wasn't known at that time, but he'd actually murdered his wife's lover and then driven to where she worked, which was in the kitchen at the pub, and set himself alight with petrol poured over himself inside the car. And we were that quick. I think we may have even been called before he set light to himself. But he was actually on fire, getting out the door of the car, going across the tarmac. We pulled up. We had to actually run round a fence. Could see him, but not get to him directly. As we're running, we see him fall down, get up, and carry on. And where he's fallen down, you can see that the tarmac's melted. He's that hot.
Yep.
Falls down the second time, and we get to him. Somebody's got a CO2 extinguisher, which is probably not the best thing, but it put it out. And I looked in his airway immediately, and it was completely black. And he's not breathing. So put a laryngoscope in and managed to, I think, see the cords. Very hard to tell in something that black. Put a tube in and nearly got my face burnt off with the steam coming out of his lungs. Wow. At that point, we stopped. But there was a police officer who came up, police inspector, because they'd been following him from the murder scene, which was a couple of miles away. They came up to me and he said to me, "How on earth can you do your job?" I sort of stopped and thought, "Oh yeah, I suppose it looked pretty awful." But I was completely in the medical moment and not allowing it to actually upset me.
And like you said, at the time, you didn't know any history.
No.
Even if you'd known he'd done that, it wouldn't have made a difference. You still do what you do. In this case, it would have been the same outcome. When I think for me personally, if no one's around, it's a medical case. If the loved ones are around, It's an
Yeah.
emotional medical
Yeah.
case.
You're upset by the people reacting to the patient.
Going to an accident, and maybe people that are not in the field don't understand it, but if somebody is in a single vehicle accident and whether they survive or die, there's actually very little emotional response to those particular incidents if there's no one else involved,
Mm.
because they are a
Mm.
training scenario. This is what we train for. You don't train for the loved ones crying and then you getting upset because they're getting upset. You train for the person who's unconscious, bleeding,
Mm.
or whatever, and
Mm.
they're actually quite easy.
Going on to my ambulance career, I got a job in North
Yes.
Wales, moved up there, and it was heaven, absolute heaven. The North Wales region, so Wales is one ambulance service, but 3 regions.
Okay.
The North region was managed by an old school paramedic
Yeah.
who told it how it was, and people respected him. So if you did wrong, he told you, you said sorry, and that was the last that was mentioned of it. It was heavenly management. My locality ambulance officer, my immediate manager, was great as well. He was a paramedic, and the
Yes.
whole place really worked. Yes, we had things we disagreed with. There's always somebody, but
Yeah.
the whole place
Yeah.
really worked. And when the chips were down, everybody came together instantly. And it was a real joy. My time in North Wales, I really enjoyed, and it was a beautiful place to live. Only reason I came back was my partner had family in Somerset, and we had to come back really from that point of view.
And every year until this, we're still doing Glastonbury and
Yeah,
those
yeah,
medical
yeah, yeah,
charity stuff.
yes.
That's building its own momentum.
And I was also going backwards and forwards to Afghanistan and doing loads of different things there. But 2011, we'd had an email. This is Sandy Gore's Afghanistan appeal, which I got involved with. They'd had a letter from an anaesthetist and an orthopedic surgeon. They'd gone out to Mazar-e-Sharif in the north of Afghanistan, done an operation on a child with a hip dysplasia. The operation had been successful. When it came to waking the child up, it went into laryngospasm. They saved the child. They were upset
Yep.
by the level of support in the hospital. Nobody really knew how to do anything, total lack of training. They just said, we don't want to go back there again because it's just too big a risk. And I thought, well, okay, I can do resuscitation training. I've done a lot over the years. I worked for various charities as well, doing resuscitation training. Thousands of people I've probably trained over the years. So I thought I can go and do that. And got going on emails, which we had by then, and I could do that, and got in touch with various people in the hospital. I got friends in medical services, the Glastonbury crowd, to gather up consumables and equipment that we'd liberated from the NHS, because the hospital had partly burnt down and they really had very little there. So arrived there, met an anaesthetist called Hamidullah Siddiqui. And later on, because he was away on a course at that particular visit, but I met Hamid, who was a surgeon, orthopedic surgeon, specialized in children. And the pair of them, whilst I trained on resus and got the doctors to work as a team, which was really what it was about. Bear in mind, we had great difficulty with the advanced life support group because they could do the compressions, they could ventilate people, they could intubate patients. You know, no problem with any of the bits, but they couldn't fit them together into a scenario. And eventually realized it was because they had never seen resus being done. So I got a bit of video from the BBC about Yorkshire Air Ambulance. The communications guy who was sitting there on the airbase whilst they were checking the helicopter came in with chest pains.
I've seen that.
Be forever grateful to him.
Yep.
I showed that to these Afghans, 6 of them, and immediately.
So for those that don't know that story, basically one of the crew had a heart attack and they resuscitated him. They did the full run through and he survived.
Yeah, they took him off for PCI in the end.
Brilliant bit of television and an amazing bit of ambulance television.
Immediately afterwards, I gave them a scenario and they did it perfectly because then they understood what I actually wanted them to do.
The cogs
and
come
again,
together.
it's this culture thing. I hadn't twigged that they hadn't seen the whole thing.
You teach each individual skill, but that's something you just don't think about. You just take it for granted.
Yeah, so made huge progress on that took 3 years, me going and coming back.
Were you self-funding this, or was this coming
all
from
self-funded.
charity?
The Swedish Committee for Afghanistan provided my accommodation, and Sandy Gore's Afghanistan appeal paid for our food as well, which was very good.
Yeah.
These two, Hamidullah and Rahimullah, the anaesthetist and the surgeon, approached me about Sandy Gore's Afghanistan appeal dealt with a lot of limb fitting, but they also orthoses for polio cases, physiotherapy, clubfoot, and developmental dysplasia of the hip, DDH, were the two big things. They used Ponseti technique for the clubfoot because it's non-surgical. You just apply serial plasters over a number of weeks, and that works. If a child's been undiagnosed with DDH and walked on it, you can't use a Pavlik harness to put that right. You have to do surgery because the femur has grown longer than it should be because it's not in the hip. And so they have to do a step cut join of the femur to shorten it. And they take a bit of the iliac crest and put it into a slot to make a new socket and then put it all together.
Yeah.
That surgery was difficult to achieve in Afghanistan. But Rahimullah had been trained so that he could do that. British orthopedic surgeon was supervising everything he did. But we just needed to make it happen. So Federal Medical Services, this is where it all comes together, agreed to pay for the metal bits and pieces that were required to make this work. So Rahimullah went off to India, where he trained, because he could buy the metal pieces cheaply there. Came back with nearly 6,000 Australian dollars worth of metal bits in a suitcase that lasted for over a year, and it worked out at £9 a patient for the metal,
which is a life-changing operation.
And, the eventual result is Hamidullah has negotiated with a private hospital run by the governor of the province. Baggage. He's negotiated to do free anaesthetics for them in exchange for the use every Thursday of their operating theatre. So that's no money's involved in that. Rahimullah is doing the surgery for nothing.
Does he go over for blocks at a time, or does he move there?
Yeah. Now these people are getting death threats. Right? I'm in theatre one time with Hamidullah in the public hospital. His phone goes off with a text message. The text message says in Pashto, which is the language that the Taliban speaks, rather than the Dari that they speak in the north, basically. But it says your children, and names them, will have their heads cut off if you carry on consorting with Westerners. There's a hyperlink on the text to a video of 9 policemen having their heads cut off and the heads being put on one side of the road, bodies on the other side.
History shows they're
being
not
done.
scared to do that.
So I said,
Yes.
Haradullah, right, I'm leaving.
Were you the
Well,
problem?
I'm a Westerner. Was the only Westerner
Yeah, that's what I
in
meant.
the
Was it
war.
because
So I said,
Yeah.
I can't stay here as much as I'd like to. I can't stay here. He said, no. He said, I get these threats when you're not here. And I couldn't believe that anybody could live under that sort of stress.
doing what he does, I would have been out of there because you couldn't
No.
have that on your
No,
conscience.
but
He's the one being
Yeah.
threatened and he didn't give it. I don't get
Yeah.
it's normal.
Rahimullah also had threats against him. And I'll come back to that in a minute. Talking about these things with lots of Afghans, not just these two, but lots of them. I was running orthopedic clinics for an orthopedic surgeon who came out. That was really interesting because he was explaining to me that he'd been head of orthopedics at Great Ormond Street, the famous children's hospital in London. He went out twice a year to Afghanistan to run clinic. But he said, I see more than a year's variety of cases in one afternoon here. Unbelievable stuff. All these quite rare things. And you're seeing 2 or 3 of us come in one afternoon. So one of the patients was actually a Taliban commander. It was very much an underground thing. They were ordinary Afghans. You couldn't separate them out. But I was invited to lunch and spoke with him. And the Muslim tradition is that if you invite somebody into your house, you undertake to protect them even if you have to lay down your life. So I was quite safe. But you get to understand what goes on, where soldiers were training an Afghan soldier and he suddenly shot.
Friendly fire.
Well,
or what do they call it? Blue on blue.
What's happened is the Afghan's family would have been kidnapped and you'd be told, if you don't shoot 6 people, your family will be killed. And
they will
he
be
knows, the Afghan knows full well that he'll be shot dead by other Western forces. He's not going to survive it.
Yeah.
But he does it
No.
to protect his family.
I hope.
Yeah, I don't know what to make of it. I still don't. You know, who's the brave one?
Yeah.
Who's the good one? Who's the bad?
Yeah.
It's all jumbled up. And the pressure that some of these people were living under, unbelievable.
How did you cope with that? Seeing this type of life that they live, knowing how we live. And you mentioned earlier that it affected you later on with that sort of resentment. How did you cope with that?
Well, the thing is that when you're in those, I don't want to sort of big it up that I'm in a dangerous situation, but function perfectly well when things are going wrong around me.
How do you deal with knowing how it was over there?
You're just really nervous about your friends, because what I was trying to lead up to was the fact that you get that friendship that you only get from being in really tough hole where things are.
Band of brothers
exactly.
Stuff.
It's exactly that.
Yeah.
Shona Ashona is the Afghan equivalent, shoulder to shoulder.
Yeah.
It's not a question of somebody leading somebody else. You're both facing it together.
Were you ever threatened yourself directly?
Well, there was an understanding with the Swedish committee and the Taliban that you wouldn't be targeted till you've been in their more than 30 days.
Oh,
But
shit.
that really doesn't make any difference because most people are hit by the crossfire.
Yeah.
That I was followed by a Pajero with blacked out windows. I was in the wrong place. So I quickly got into the right place. But I was definitely
Yeah.
being followed. I've been
Yeah.
blown over by somebody exploding anti-tank mines. They detonated about 6 or 7 of them in one go, and it blew all the render off a wall, which hit me
Wow.
in the back, blew me to the ground.
Yeah.
And my first thought was that I
Yeah.
died. I couldn't understand how I couldn't get up for 20 minutes. Couldn't get breath up.
Yeah. Big bang
Yeah,
and then
yeah.
pain and
It's just,
yeah.
but,
I've just been blown up.
I've had a few bullets come my way, but in
Yeah.
Haiti, I actually had one rip my shorts, which
Oh,
was
Jesus.
too close. But yeah, I mean, it's not a huge problem. But when I come home, then I'm thinking of these people who are living there and can't get out of it. One time
Yeah.
I came back from Mazar, I've been teaching mass casualty triage, and they had a bomb explosion probably whilst I was in the air. And they had 29. Well, I contacted Hamidullah in East Est and said, how did
Yeah.
it go? And he said, we had 29 patients who came in through the hospital door, and all
Yeah.
29 left hospital later on.
Well, I think you
Yes.
can give that a
Yeah.
pass for your
And
talk about high
yeah,
fidelity
exactly.
exercises.
And I was just so proud of having taught them.
Yeah.
It was absolutely
Yeah.
wonderful moment. But then going back home and you see the whinging, sniveling
Yeah.
patients.
The
Yeah.
entitlement. How did it affect you as a were you
I
married
was married from
at this point?
73 to 95. And then from 96, I've been with my partner to now.
So she's seen you through the majority of this
Mm.
Afghanistan journey. How did it affect you as a partner? If you were
I
to imagine
I
where
asked her
she would
permission
say,
whether I could go, and she said, "I'll never ever stop you from doing something you want to do." But she's
yes.
somebody who's nervous about everything. She gets anxious about every little thing.
What did she see in the changes of you? Did you give her sanitized versions or did you give her the real versions as they were happening?
Well, just in the early days, I couldn't say anything that was really happening because with the Swedish committee in Afghanistan, they allocated me an hour a day when I could actually try to get internet access. You didn't
Yeah.
always succeed. You certainly didn't try to blog or anything like
Yeah.
that. I've tended not to say all that much because she surrounds herself with the fact, well, you're a paramedic, so you'll be all right. The famous time with the shorts in Haiti, I did manage to get a conversation on WhatsApp, and I phoned her up
Okay.
um, and spoke to her, and I said, "Brought me that brand new pair of shorts." I said, "They're absolutely wrecked. Bloody bullets absolutely destroyed them." And she burst into tears at the other end, and I thought, "Oh yeah, perhaps that wasn't the right thing to say." Well, I was so tired that all I could see was the destruction of the shorts.
Not the big picture that
I
I've
did
just
have a bit
been
of a
shot at.
scorch mark across my butt. It takes a while to process these things.
Was there at any stage that she wanted to come over
No,
with you? And I guess her being a
she,
female would have made it hard anyway,
Sue
but
wouldn't go to anywhere that didn't have a first class toilet. And that cuts out quite a few places in the UK.
My wife's version of camping is a hotel without
Yeah.
24-hour room
Yeah.
service.
Well,
That's
Sue loves
slumming.
going out off in the camper van, but it's got to be on her terms. And funny enough, I prefer to go to these places on my own because I can
Yeah.
look up that looking after other people in places like that is really tough.
Yep. I get that 100%. I've worked as a solo officer uh,
Yeah.
15 years. And when I was attacked at work, one of the things I said afterwards was that I
Yeah.
was glad I was
I
on my own because I didn't have
I
to
had
think about anyone else.
I had
It was
had an
survival.
incident later on when I went in South Wales, went to a really rough part of town, 1 o'clock in the morning, to guy who'd taken an overdose, 30-year-old who'd taken an overdose. Go in the house, it's all in darkness. It's very difficult. We have estates of houses where you can't drop to the front door. The front doors are open just. So I push that in, call out, and I can see this guy in the darkness stood in the kitchen, but he's not communicating very much. Go in, and he appears to be alone in the kitchen. He's got a load of tablets out on the countertop, and he's obviously taken quite a load already.
Yep.
So it'd be great if you were to stop that just a moment. Can you speak to me? So eventually find out that he did intend to kill himself by this. I'd noticed picking up the packs that they're for a woman. I say, whose tablets are these? Oh, it's my mum's. She told me to take them. And I said, well,
Mm.
why did she tell you? Well, because I've run up 30 grand debt on cocaine that my parents are paying off.
Do you
Well,
think
at
his
this
mum told
point,
him?
mum appears. I thought he was alone in the house, but no, mum
Oh,
appears.
right.
Little, tiny little woman she was. And she confirms exactly. She said, I told him that because he's a useless piece of shit. And then she went over and smacked him really hard.
Oh,
So
we shouldn't
he
laugh,
was,
but that's just a
I was
wow.
immediately on the case saying, don't you dare hit her, you know. And
Yeah.
at that point, he's shouting and spitting and, getting quite riled. And then stepdad, who's a huge bloke, turns
Right.
up and comes in, and I'm backing off because this is really looking like a dangerous situation.
It's yeah, it's starting to
And
bubble, it's starting to boil
their
over.
stepdad's shouting and bawling at him. So it is coming to violence. I ducked down underneath a dining table and pressed the emergency button on my radio, which probably the same with you. It locks out anybody else, and what you
Yeah.
say is broadcasting for 30 seconds.
That happens in
All
some of
right.
our states
We,
and not all. In
yeah.
Southeast Queensland, there's the GWN,
Yeah.
which does that,
Oh,
but that doesn't happen.
right.
The
Well,
state's too
yeah,
big.
we've got it across the UK, but obviously only within your service, that it
Yep.
broadcasts. As I press the button, stepdad says, fuck off out of here, or I'll fucking kill you. And of course, everybody heard it and thought that it was being said at me. So
Yep.
within 4 minutes, police came through the door, which was
Yeah.
really good effort.
That's better
Puzzled
than the
because
opposite.
all they could see was me underneath the table, just wetting myself with laughter because I hadn't said a word. He'd said it all.
Yeah.
But anyway,
It could have gone
oh yeah,
pear-shaped very quickly, though. So I'm just kind of trying to picture a typical year for you where you're working for the Welsh Ambulance Service and then you go back to Somerset Ambulance Service. You're going to Afghanistan. How many times are you going a year?
some
A couple of
years,
times?
yes.
And you're also doing your
Yeah.
Glastonbury and involved with that. Did you ever have a
Um,
holiday
yeah, occasionally,
where there wasn't desert?
I tended to go to those green, tranquil places. I also sailed a bit. I sailed on some tall ships. And
Okay.
I took a year where I was on the bank down in South Wales, where I actually worked on a tall ship as medical purser.
Yep.
That was great. Really enjoyed that. It was very hard work. Every time I came back to the UK on the ship, I'd do a couple of night shifts on the car in South Wales and then back onto the ship. So I kept
Yep.
my job and sailed on the tall ship. But
Yep.
eventually I went to Vanuatu in the South Pacific.
Yep. That's our most
Yes.
common cruise
Yeah,
destination over here is Vanuatu
great
and the
for
Pacific
well,
Islands
Santo,
and
the island
Caledonia,
that
that
I
sort of
was
thing.
on, biggest island, but small population, great place for diving. The President Coolidge is the big ship that went down there, great for diving, apparently. I went there with an outfit called Paramedic, which is an Australian charity, and really enjoyed 2 months out there. I went again in 2020, almost the same.
What happened
Yeah,
in
yeah,
2020?
happening from just before Christmas, in fact. And then by February the 1st, when I got on the flight, it was picking up pace, but everybody's, well, a couple of months and
Yep.
it'll die down. It'll be all right.
Well, me and my family were over in Japan in Tokyo and Hakuba from about the 10th of December to the
Mm,
5th of January,
yeah,
2019 to 2020. I'm pretty sure myself and my daughter
right.
had COVID while we were over there.
When I landed in Dubai to change planes to go to Brisbane, I had a couple of hours and I was watching the BBC news on TV, and it was all about the World Health Organization declaring it a pandemic.
Shut the
Well,
world down.
I was sat in with a load of Chinese people. So I asked where they'd come from, and they'd come from Wuhan. I was
Shit.
sat with, no, no,
You
no,
couldn't
no.
script that, Nana.
That's when small world is against you, really. Of all the places that they could have come.
I'm just seeing the movie The Terminal with
Yes,
Tom
yeah,
Hanks when he's
yeah.
stuck.
I
I'm just
did actually
envisioning you.
worry. I've been through it as well. The first trip to Vanuatu, I got stuck in Brisbane airport because I didn't have a visa for Australia because I was transiting, and found that in
Yes.
Brisbane airport at that time, you couldn't go from one to the other. You couldn't go from arrivals to,
You've got to come out through customs
yes,
to go back in to
yeah.
go
And
somewhere
I
else.
didn't have the visa, so they wouldn't let
Really?
me. I very nearly did a Tom Hanks there, but luckily a cleaner let me through. He pulled the key out. He said, "Go through that door. Don't say anybody told you." Didn't
Oh
have a
my
stamp
God.
in my passport. I hadn't arrived in Australia, so I couldn't leave. But they cleared that up eventually. Anyway, I arrive in Vanuatu, and very quickly thereafter, they shut down in Vanuatu. So 65 islands, nobody was allowed to travel between the island.
Yep.
Then the Australian paramedics that were there for ProMedical, they had to go home because their
Yep.
insurance lapsed and all the rest of it. I
Yep.
came up to my 2 months, 31st of March, when I was meant to leave, when my visa ran out, everything, and
Yeah.
the flights were gone. That was it. ProMedical welcomed my offer to stay. I couldn't do sod all else.
Yeah.
The choice of sitting on a beach for an unknown length of time. The Australian Prime Minister had been reported on the news saying that he envisaged a lockdown, the travel for level 4 travel ban going for 18 months, I think. The thought
Mm.
of being there for 18 months, sitting on a beach, I didn't know. No,
For some people will be listening to this, they'll be like, that sounds like heaven. But for someone with your experience and your appreciation of humanity and the shit you've gone through, I think that'd be a
yeah,
nightmare.
yeah. So they said, carry on. It's great. Thank you. They paid for my accommodation and my food. I had an account with the supermarket, which was great. So I carried on, but then they had a doctor at a 31-bed hospital on Samto, very basic. They didn't have a working X-ray. It had broken down. They had one ventilator, but that was part of the anaesthetic machine. A lot of use from a COVID point of view. And I thought somebody of my age and profile, essentially, if I get COVID, that's it.
Well, that's what we were told.
Certainly seemed quite realistic to me. And I was asked about, did I know about PPE? Because the World Health Organization were organizing it, and they were following their guidelines, which the UK wasn't.
Yeah.
But I knew about PPE and donning and doffing ways to do it. We were promised stuff. The Australian Air Force was going to drop it in, and they did. But quite a while later, when they did it, they landed a C-130, pushed the stuff out the back on pallets, and it's left there. They didn't set foot on the tarmac, and they took off.
Yeah.
And we had to leave it 72 hours to decontaminate out in the tropical rain.
We look back at it now and we're like, in retrospect, what a load of shit. But at the time, you've got to treat it with the information you've got, which is that this thing's going to kill everyone.
Got the PPE sorted through a hardware store and some great people there. The only thing we couldn't get was plastic aprons. They just did not exist on the island. But we made those out of bin bags. Made artificial.
The plastic thing, that was one of the hardest parts about being a paramedic during COVID in Queensland, wearing those full cover plastic things in the heat. Even just your PPE, your rip-off ones, the amount of sweat you would get in. It got to the stage, and they finally changed the PPE. You have to take your own health into consideration when you're wearing PPE, because sometimes if you're in 40 degrees with 70, 80, 90% humidity, you're going to end up dying from heat stroke instead of COVID.
Yeah. And I appreciate that in Vanuatu, only in the 30s, but day and night, and with precious little aircon.
It's relentless.
If you can only dry your clothes if you get them in the sun.
Otherwise, you're still employed, or are you on a casual basis at work now?
I'm on as a bank. I'm not being for my state pension and the NHS pension. So Sue's fine at home, wondering when she'll see me, and then we get a tropical cyclone, Harold. I've never liked Harold ever since. It really hit us, absolutely devastated the island.
How old are you roughly at this point? You're in your 60s? When this happens?
Yeah.
I'm imagining in 60 years you haven't come close to a cyclone or a hurricane or whatever, around the world.
The maximum wind speed I've experienced was in Shetland, 105 miles an hour. But then that's somewhere that's built, that regularly gets those sort of winds.
Yes.
And I mean, even down here, we get winds that top 80 mile an hour. What's that?
180 about 140?
140 kilometers. Yeah. 105, 170, roughly. Big winds, but we're built for it.
Yeah. They're not huts and beach houses, and they are slowly sort of, these are places that have survived a very long time.
Oh, yeah. 350 k's. The electric poles were a piece of I-beam steel, quite stiff, and they stood up to the wind, no trouble at all. However, if a piece of corrugated iron, of which there were many, flew into the top of a bent like a piece of spaghetti, right down to the ground.
Yep, because it's basically you just almost cut it in. It's a hatchet job.
Well, it's just the extra windage just took it out. And we were left with no electricity, no water supply because it was pumped by electric, pretty much flooding. But we'd had a meter of rain in 6 hours and all the rats coming out of the ground.
If you were going to write the world's worst emergency management case scenario, you've pretty
Yeah,
much just described it. A pandemic in a South Pacific island. No one's allowed to travel anywhere. Here's a category 5
yeah,
cyclone just for fun
yeah,
and go.
exactly. You, you know, I've never been a victim in a major incident. I've worked in several major incidents and I've practiced major incidents till I'm fed up with them. But I've never been a victim
Yeah.
at the same time. And that is
Yes.
quite tough. And also, it was the fact that I was 20,000 kilometers from home. But to say that I felt lonely would be an understatement. I really thought I wasn't going to see anybody. I thought, I'm not going to get back. The French had
Yeah.
made an offer to me before the last flights went for me to fly to Noumea
Yeah.
to Tokyo, Tokyo to Hawaii, Hawaii to Los Angeles, Los Angeles to Paris. Well, that came through the British High Commission to me. And I said no, because first of all, I couldn't get the 200-mile to Port Villa to get on the flight to Noumea.
Yeah.
If everything had gone well, I would have ended up in Paris, and there was no guarantee I could get from Paris to Somerset. Might have got to
Yeah.
London, but it was just too much down.
There was so
And
many what ifs, wasn't there? There was
and
so many
and
uncertainties, and
if
they were
one of those
changing the
flights had been
goalposts every day.
delayed, I would have been in quarantine every step of the way for 2 weeks. And
Yeah.
if I hadn't caught COVID doing that, then how would I have caught COVID at any time?
Yeah.
It was ridiculous.
Yeah.
And then I was hearing we were having over 1,000 deaths a day in the UK. I was hearing about colleagues that I knew who died of COVID.
Yeah.
And I thought, what will I go back to? I've got a son and 3 granddaughters in the Midlands. I had no idea whether they would be okay or not.
Yeah. You may as well
Yeah.
have been on
Well,
another
yeah, I
planet.
pretty much was.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
so it was a really tough time in Vanuatu. Everybody was feeling very forgotten and lonely. I I had to go up to the hospital and check on something. Just outside of the emergency room doors, I could hear hammering. And when I went in, there was a doctor and a nurse, and they had a kit coffin that they were assembling. Yeah.
They were
And
oh,
it was for a
wow.
7-year-old girl who who'd come in. She had some long-term medical condition. So it wasn't a great surprise that she
Mm.
died, but she died in the emergency room. And there was
Yeah.
something about them knocking a coffin together. The parents wanted to take her back to the village to
Yeah.
bury her. And that just really affected me. I think it was a
Yeah.
combination of the away from home and nothing to do, nothing, no medical input required. It just really hit me.
I think that was the biggest thing that hit the
Mm.
world during COVID is
Yeah.
isolation and loneliness and the hospital system, people
Mm.
dying on their own, people dying
Well,
without seeing people. You're not allowed to visit anyone. I think that has
yeah. Well,
changed the
coming
world.
coming back to the UK, I being me, I got up and I got a team of us from First World Medical Services because a lot of people were furloughed, and the ones who weren't clinical, and
Yeah.
we went around doing vaccinations for the NHS because started
Okay.
from January 21.
Yeah.
We were out doing the housebound people because we had the skills to be able to find them, get to them, get in the house, vaccinate them.
Yeah.
And
Do
I
your
went
PPE.
to mostly elderly ladies who'd been living alone in their house for 4 or 5 years before COVID. During COVID, they didn't even have any visitors, had shopping put down on the doorstep, and that was about it. We were the first people that they'd spoken to coming around to ditch their vaccinations.
That's got to be the biggest learning on how we do things differently. And some people are happy where they could go 4 years and not talk to anyone by choice. There's a whole
Some of
different level of
some of these
loneliness
people
when it's
were
put upon you.
dementia cases who were locked in their houses by their families.
That's the biggest issue going forward. I don't think there's been enough open reviews on the
But
human aspect of
the
things.
biggest thing out of Vanuatu was that I kept in touch with Hamidullah and Rahimullah, and they both got COVID. Rahimullah died of COVID. Hamidullah so
I'm sorry to hear that.
ill that his brother, who's also a doctor, one of his brothers, actually contacted me on WhatsApp and had to ask, did I know how to set up a ventilator for Hamidullah? I knew the ventilators because I'd seen them, the Japanese ones, but I didn't know how to set up. I've already explained for Rahimullah, whilst he was slowly about lying prone and so on. I'm doing this from the South Pacific and just feeling I got somebody from FMS back in the UK to advise on setting up ventilators so that Hamidullah could be ventilated. And Hamidullah survived. Back to Rahimullah, I'd never met his wife in person. I met his children, but she's an obstetrician.
Okay.
She was left with the children. Later on, when I got back, Senegal's Afghanistan appeal helped we raised some money along with quite a number of orthopedic surgeons and provide them with some money every month. Then when the Taliban took over, they've gone to India for surgery on one of the children, which had been arranged a long time because they couldn't come back. Because she being a lone woman, she couldn't work back in Afghanistan. So they were stuck in India. And at the same time, Hamidullah was denounced by various people in the Taliban as having worked with the Norwegian army, who trained him way back for a short period of time. And that he'd worked with Westerners. So they threatened to cut his children's heads off. So he fled. He went into hiding with his family and kept in touch with me by WhatsApp. I'm back in the UK now, but I just can't think what to suggest. So lots of long conversations with Hamidullah.
Was when he was in hiding, was he still in Afghanistan?
But I purposely didn't know where, so that I couldn't betray it. I mean, to the point where I've got lots of Afghan friends that I keep in touch with, and they bury their phones in the dirt
just
in between conversations. So they will choose a time.
Oh, wow.
They will phone me and we talk.
How much they're risking by maintaining that relationship.
Anyway, we worked out that we had to get Hamidullah out.
Did he want out?
I mean, previously I talked with both of them about coming out of Afghanistan all the time, and they both steadfastly stuck to, no, I'm Afghan. I stay here. And this is what I do.
This is my...
And they both dedicated to medicine for poor people. All the bets were off once the Taliban got like that. They couldn't work. Even the Swedish committee has been shut down. 3,000 Afghans became unemployed, and a lot of those were doctors, physiotherapists and things. But Anyway, so long and involved. I even wrote an open letter to Boris Johnson, which I didn't get a reply to. I didn't get any help from the British government whatsoever, other than to be told that they should have a visa, but they couldn't get it until they got to. You can't apply for asylum, you see, until you get to.
Yeah,
And
while you're in country.
They couldn't even get a visa from a British embassy abroad. So eventually, I went to the Norwegians because I knew that the Norwegian army had done some of his training. Took them a fortnight.
Yeah.
They granted visas for them, for the whole family.
Doesn't that
Yeah.
just do your bloody head in? You just got to ask the
Absolutely.
right people.
And would you believe the doctor who trained Hamidullah when he was working for the Norwegian army, I met on a Norwegian tour ship off the Faroe Islands.
The planet's getting smaller every time we talk.
Anyway, yeah, it was very difficult to get them out because their passports had run out and they didn't have visas for Pakistan, where they had to go to be got out. And I'm not going to say how we did that because there's a lot of bits involved in that.
The results that
got them out. And last July, I went over to Norway and visited them, and he's got his license to practice medicine now. So there's your good news story.
So he's still a doctor.
The kids are getting on absolutely fine. His wife, who didn't speak any English and now speaks Norwegian and does it well, it's all quite good in that sense. Back to Munira and the kids in.
So the widow and 4 kids.
One of the kids who hasn't got disability is Sajad. At age 14, when we started this last year, he's a real go-getter. His English has improved to the point where I can understand it when he WhatsApps me and when he speaks to me. He went into the Australian embassy in Delhi, maybe the Australian High Commission, actually. You know what I mean. Got some forms from them and then managed to get in touch with the UNHCR. I think they may have pushed him in that direction.
You said he was 14 when he was doing this?
Yes, but he's 15 now.
So he's doing this as a 14 and 15-year-old. Most kids can barely brush their teeth.
Yeah. We're in a different league here. Then we get the forms filled out, but the Australians, you don't come out of it too squeaky clean, because although they were sort of promised a place, they had to have a sponsor who had to be an Australian national. And every Australian that I approached with this in mind said, "Oh yeah, love to do that, but let's have a look at the forms." And then they looked at all the backup material, and it did appear that they had to find them accommodation and pay for it, although that could be reimbursed later on. Now, it's the upfront stuff. It was just impossible to get anybody to commit to that. Their visa was running out for India. So the UNHCR, they stepped in and told the Indian government, you can't just say leave. They chivied up the Australian government, and suddenly they were called in for their biometrics and put on the flight list. And the 13th of November, they land in Sydney. And I'm very pleased to say that I've got, they will have a government-sponsored person who they get put up for 30 days, I think, in a hotel and get somebody to show them the ropes and find. But I've also got a friend from Vanuatu who's coming to live in Sydney. She writes today. She's lived in Sydney before. She's going to help out various paramedics and friends of paramedics and people that are going to try to make them welcome, because that must be a hell of a culture shock.
Oh, I cannot even imagine. Well, hopefully there'll be people that listen to this. I've got family in Sydney.
These kids have never seen the sea.
Yeah. It's unbelievable. That is such a good service. So we've got 5 new people coming to Australia on the
Yeah.
13th of November from Afghanistan whose husband and father has just
Well,
lived a life of hell in
and
servitude
to
of
to
his
to
nation.
explain my feelings about him, we've set up a special page, I call it a Yammer page, that was an FOS one, tightly controlled. Uh, got the details of every DDH op that he did and some other orthopedic operation. We logged them all on there and they get reviewed
Yeah.
by orthopedic specialists in this country. There's 1,500 kids who are walking normally and not disabled because of him.
There's no words to
And
describe that.
my opinion of the British government, who weren't prepared to even contemplate having a well-trained anaesthetist and a good
Yeah.
obstetrician
Yeah.
for virtually nothing. It's immeasurably small.
When you talk to them before they come over to Australia, please say thank you from us and
Mm.
give them our love and our support.
Yeah.
Please give them my details if they come
Well,
up here or if I go down there. I would
yeah,
love
I'll give them
to catch up.
your contact details
I'd
and
be
vice
honoured.
versa. Yeah.
So you have done so much for so many people, and you were recognised and awarded the British Empire Medal. That's a
It,
pretty
it,
big deal.
it was to me. I mean, it's right down the pecking order in, OBEs, CPEs.
So we're not
Oh,
calling you
definitely not.
sir,
Well, only if you spell it with a C. Uh, but
but
the whole thing was
that
I've spent my whole adult life despising, especially people who are OBEs. It was a running joke in the 70s in the UK. People got the OBE because they breathed and they were in a
yeah.
position.
It's people like yourselves. You retired from being a paramedic, what,
Uh,
3 years ago?
suppose so, yes.
Yeah. So for over
Well,
40
no, I'm
years
still a
as
paramedic.
a practicing,
And I still
still a
practice
registered.
that with the FMS stuff. So I'm actually still thinking,
Yes. So you're not far from
yeah,
50 years in the job. That is unbelievable. There's no word. It is an honor to talk to you. You are the epitome of what human beings should be about, and that's looking after other people. Sounds like you've had a hell of an adventure
well,
while you're doing it.
yeah, but the thing is, I enjoy it. I mean, if you understand, sitting with somebody who's dying is a great achievement.
It's an
Yeah,
honor.
paramedics are so
Yeah.
privileged. We go to people's houses, we
Yeah.
see how they live. Uh,
We're with them at their
yeah,
worst moments of their
and
life.
and if you enjoy that, if you can see the positive side of that, then there's no better job. I'm sure there's some in Australia, people here who are paramedics who are complaining about the job right from the word go. And
Yeah.
it's no more, when they say, oh, we got all these useless jobs that we shouldn't be going to. Well, it's not useless to that person who called. Yeah, we've all had the ones who've called us to say they've got chest pains and they miraculously resolve when you get there. And if you don't enjoy the job, it must be incredibly hard.
It would be the worst job in the
Yeah,
world if you don't like it because you
yeah.
need to give it everything to get everything. So you're still involved with your charities. How do people get involved? Do you only exist as the festival thing within the
Um,
United Kingdom?
we have got a few people who've gone to other countries since
Yep.
they've become members, and
Yep.
that's fine. We have quite a few who start off with us, and the main members, but perhaps they're too busy with their job to actually do stuff for us clinically.
Yeah.
But then later on, they may come back and do something, or they may come back in a different
Yeah.
role.
Have you ever thought about expanding the model or adopting the
The
model elsewhere?
difficulty is that we have a warehouse full of kit. We can only
Yeah.
do about 12 events a year because they're all in the summer and they're all at weekends. Every festival is a weekend. That's the model.
Yes.
Some may start on a
Yeah.
Friday, some may end on a Monday, but
Yeah.
it's all weekend. Um,
Yeah.
to get that sort of number of staff for every weekend, so we turn down more than we do.
Yes.
But to get a license to have a festival, it's becoming increasingly the fact that you have to follow our sort of model. We're deeply involved with writing the official guides to what should be supplied at events.
And that's the problem with starting something new in another place, is getting the buy-in, getting obviously the logistical startup costs are huge to start with, but then it's that paperwork. That would be a nightmare to work. And you're talking hundreds of hours
see,
worth of administration
if we
to
had
get
to
something like that set
employ,
up.
I mean, we have every 24 hours at Glastonbury, we have 2 A&E consultants on duty, 2 anaesthetists, probably 5 or 6 doctors, plus I don't know how many nurses, and so on.
And they're all volunteering, and if you had to pay them their hourly rate,
it wouldn't be feasible. I mean, yes, we only ask people to do 2 shifts, so like some time at the festival, but you still.
I think the hardest part, like I would love to see something like that come up over here. The biggest issue with here is the size. We don't have a lot of festivals. They're dying, the amount that have actually had to cancel over the last couple of years. Part of that is medical costs and all the logistics and insurance. But to get people, you'd have to fly them in.
Exactly. I met an Australian paramedic in Haiti. He was there.
I worked with him the way this planet's going with us.
I have no idea what his surname is. He worked for one of the big mining companies, and he had a 4-hour flight to get to work. He worked for a week and then fly back.
We call that FIFO, fly in, fly out. Or there's Dido, drive in, drive out. You can drive for 12 hours and go to work for a week or 2. Sometimes it's 2 on, 2 off. It varies from place to place. The size of this place is unbelievable. It's been a real pleasure to talk to you, mate. One of my fondest memories growing up is learning to fish at Apex Park. I lived just around the corner. I used to ride my bike as an 8 and 9-year-old with my fishing rod, with my quarter pint of maggots I'd buy from the tackle shop. People over here are like, "How you use what?" We used to buy a quarter pint of maggots, and then Mum would always crack the shits if I let them go into casters and then into flies, and she'd open it up. I'd be in trouble. Catching carp, rudd and roach. I taught myself to fish, and that to this very day is still one of my favorite memories, and it is still my thing to do. It is my therapy is to go fishing. Apex Park, and I also got in trouble once because I snuck out and I went to the Apex Park fair, and my dad told me not to go, so he came and grabbed me by the ear and dragged me home. I still remember my phone number when I lived
How many years ago?
Burnham. I left there in 89. So I would have been there from when I was 4. So that would be, so it's 8 years. So about 81 or so, I would have moved there. I think I remember when Charles and Diana got married, I remember having a street party. So, and that was in
So you're about the same age as my son.
So I had Sister Eileen was my headmistress.
See, I've only lived
St.
here
Joseph's
since 2010.
Well, I'm going to give a shout out to some of my friends. Like I said, I still remember my phone number. I still remember my friends' phone numbers from back then. So yeah, I had my brother from another mother, Jeff. I have Pauline was my babysitter. There's Matt, a bunch of school friends. And Facebook's great in that regards because I'm still in touch with a lot of them. Please, guys, if you see Nich around, say g'day. Nich, it's been an absolute pleasure having you on, mate. If I was a script writer, I'd be writing some scripts, and even just the story of the surgeons you've worked with, the stories you've had to tell. You've lived a life, and the amount of charity work you've done. You are a true gentleman, mate, and it's been an absolute privilege to have a chat to you. Actually, I've been remiss. You have a book.
Oh, yeah.
You have published a book called Resuscitating Afghanistan. Where do they find that?
If they say Afghanistan, if they just put that in, it should come up as an Amazon Kindle.
So that's about your time in Afghanistan.
Yes.
Like a journal. If people have enjoyed this conversation, go out, grab that book. If you want to get hold of Nich or ask any questions via myself, just reach out to the Facebook page or beyond the call Peter at gmail.com. It's been a long conversation, but I could honestly speak to you for another couple of hours. I've loved every second of it. I really appreciate the time you've given me and the insight you've given me into your story. If anyone deserves to be known as a sir, you are
Thank
it.
you. No, it's been a pleasure doing it. Yeah, hopefully you'll send me a link.
I got some editing to do and we'll get it out there. And let's keep in touch and please keep my details to your friends when they arrive in Sydney. All right, mate. You take care of yourself. Thank you again. Thanks for listening to this episode of Beyond the Call. If you like what we're about, please make sure you subscribe, and if you can leave a review, that would be appreciated. If you have feedback or suggestions for future guests, please contact me via my socials. Please share with your networks and help me expand my reach. It's a great privilege for people to share their stories and allow us to go beyond the call.